So we must do two things, two great things together to encompass that enormous new view that lies before us, but to encompass it within the framework of science, to see it within the whole categorical framework of science, and to see that these two are not separate, but that they are wedded. The bigness of the idea, the newness of the idea, the greatness of it is one with the structure of science, the structure of being itself.
So we take that field that we have spoken of, that background, that evolution, as a general basis now, a common basis together, and begin to apply, or let the calculus apply itself to that. In moving forward, then, what do we need? What do we really need further within ourselves? We need to know the pedal notes for each level that we are going to be addressing, or that is going to be addressed by the calculus. The findings, the results, are going to be attuned to, in alignment with the pedal note of each of the specific levels that we touch. So what do I mean by pedal note? Does anyone know? Anyone want to jump in?
Something that is running through consistently.
Yes.
It's a line.
Exactly. These are all good. General line, a general tone, a general theme that runs through the whole level, right? What did you say? Did you say a tone? Yeah, tone. What is it, when you play the piano and you hold down the pedal? It sustains, doesn't it? There's something that's being sustained. So in each of these levels you have something that is sustained all the way through, whether you're looking at the Word or the Christ or Christianity or science. That which is being sustained is somehow always there as a background, as a tonality, a general theme that runs through that particular level. And so we need to refresh that and to reawaken that awareness within ourselves as we go through. I don't know to what degree we'll be able to keep doing that through the rest of the week, but we can start. That's why I love mind. Mind always adapts itself to the learning of something new, the teaching of something new, and we will bring many of these things in as we go through mind. And we will need to know the values of the four on each of those levels, because those four of the Word, the Christ, Christianity, and science are not the same from level to level, are they? They're not the same. They are varied. You see, they're varied in their office. You see, the Word in divine science is very different than the Word in absolute Christian Science and the Word in Christian Science. So we need to be aware of those verticals, how that aspect of the operation that's under consideration is varied in its vertical from level to level to level. So if we take the whole picture again of that design of being, we can see that as we come out from science itself, that what is happening is that the infinite one being is translating itself. It translates itself in its divinity. And as it translates itself in its divinity, you see that the infinite becomes divine. The infinite translates itself as the divine. The divine is always that which explains the infinite to the human. To the human. So as that explanation comes into focus, we see that the way that being explains itself is always through its idea of itself. And its idea of itself is the calculus. Its idea of itself is the fourfold calculus. So that the moment we touch the level of divine science, then the four come into the center of focus. We know that as that is happening, that there is an infinite impact that is taking place at each of these further levels, and that impact will be patterned. It's patterned by the calculus. It's patterned by the four. And from your study of the Four Levels book, you know that we have really a kind of a great epitomization or a way of describing those four in a very general way. That, for instance, we know that the word, essentially that the word has to do with the self-declaration of being. So that all through that vertical of the word, that operational depth, is coming the self-declaration of the word. And when we come to the Christ, we see that throughout the vertical of the Christ, throughout that depth, that operational depth, every level will in some way show us something about the self-operation of being. And when we come to Christianity, it will be about the fact that Christianity is the self-fulfillment of being. Being fulfilled as what it is, you see, within itself. And that the Word and the Christ are that which culminate in, which result in the self-fulfilling of being. And then finally we would see that in science, science says, I, science, am the Word, Christ, and Christianity. And so what I am showing you is the great self-interpretation of being, a self-interpretation of myself, a great self-explanation of being. The multidimensional depth of the operational four, that which comes forth as divine science, absolute Christian science and Christian science, comes out from that, from the self-declaring Word, you see, the self-operating Christ, the self-fulfilled Christianity, and the self-interpreting or self-explanation of science. So we see that there are those four great themes. They're not pedal notes. The pedal notes go through the horizontals, but they are somehow the vertical thrust, the vertical intention of being to establish itself, you see, comes first as the intention to declare itself fully as the Word, and then to operate fully, a touch really of the expression of the Christ, the operation of the Christ, and then the Word and the Christ always resulting in the outcome, Christianity being the outcome of the Word and the Christ, always the self-fulfillment, how the Word and the Christ are fulfilled, bring out the full and complete demonstration, really, of the Word and the Christ. And finally, science, which would gather up the Word, the Christ, and Christianity and say, this which looks to you to be three different aspects, it's really one thing, it's really me, it's really science, it is I, science, explaining myself to you and interpreting myself everywhere, in all things. Yeah. Okay, so as we begin with our framework, we begin with mind and with the level of science itself. And that level now is going to lend itself to the category of the four, the fourfold operation, in order to show us more order in those ideas which we know appear on the level of science itself. So we have some intuitive sense about these ideas already in our training through the dimensional structuring. Now we have to ask further questions of that little field, that little gathering, that group, that cluster of ideas that we know. Answer the question, what is mind as itself? Right? This is a question that is adapted to the level of science itself. When we want to know something more about being as mind, the infinite one as mind, we say, what is mind as itself? Not in relationship to anything, but the core essence. You see, that's science, isn't it? That sense of science as having no relationship. It's not this. We come to something further and further and further as we touch the other levels, but in itself, in its essence, that which makes mind what it is, that's what we are dealing with here. Mind, then, science itself is going to show us what about mind? What are the ideas that we have there? It's helpful to go first through these pedal notes so that we can refresh our sense of what each level is doing, what its purpose is, what its great theme is. And so you see that at the point of science, that science itself is that which has no relationship to anything. It is within itself the infinite one and contains all else within itself, but with no accentuation on that which is implied within it. It's like that, what we have called the infinite one is the implicate one. It implicates, it implies everything else within itself. And only through the further levels then do we have the explication of that which is implied within science itself. So the further levels are the explicate, the explication of the implicate one. Then when we come to divine science, we're going to see something quite different. That as that infinite principle becomes aware, becomes consciously conscious of its infinite self-containment, as it begins to consider itself, to turn back on itself, to refer to itself, to refer to itself and what it holds within itself. What is it that it holds within itself? It holds its idea, its infinite idea within itself, its whole sphere of expression. This is all divine science. This is the level of divine science, the tone of divine science, the tone of the oneness, you see, of principle and idea. That principle has an idea, that principle is ever one with that idea, that idea is the whole sphere of the expression of that principle, the whole sphere of the operation of that principle. And so there is no relationship between principle and ideas yet, but only that relationship of principle to its own infinite idea of itself. This is divine science. But when you ask the further question, because the human mind, which is being really, you see that the divine, the infinite is bringing the divine to the human. So there is a descent. Every new descent is answering a new field of questions that the human mind has. And the moment you ask those questions that we're all very, very familiar with, questions like, well, what about individual ideas? You tell me that there is an infinite idea But I need a specific idea. I need a very definite idea. So the question is, what about ideas? What about individual ideas? You've immediately moved to the level of absolute Christian Science. This is all going on nested within divine science, within the infinite one that is science itself. But absolute Christian Science then will be primarily focused on showing us the individual relationship between principle and each individual idea of that principle. This is absolute Christian Science. There are many, many other aspects of that pedal note, of that theme, of how it diversifies itself and varies itself through the four, but we take just these biggest lines right now so that we see that we're dealing with a relationship, that principle has a relationship not only to its idea as a whole, but to each idea, individual idea within that whole, within that whole.